All right, listen up. We've all heard the debate OKRs versus balanced scorecard. But what about OKRs and balanced scorecard? What if we could combine the best of both worlds into one powerful system? Actually, in the literature, there are some cool examples of hybrid systems that blend balanced scorecard stability and control with OKRs, innovation, and drive for change. But why should you even listen to me? I'm Ali. I've got a PhD in performance management and years of experience as a management consultant under my belt. Now, my biggest pet peeve are business buzzwords, so you won't find any of those here. These frameworks that combine two or more methodologies are generally referred to as hybrid frameworks or systems. And no, we're not talking about the software solution. I know the word system might trigger our IT friends, but in this case, it's not a tool or a platform. We are referring basically to a methodology. So hybrid, just like in any other context, means a blend. We are combining elements from both OKRs and balanced scorecard to create a more tailored, flexible framework that fits a specific environment. Think of it like a hybrid car. It runs on both gasoline and electricity and combines the strengths of each. Same idea here. Since hybrid systems emerged more from practice than from theory, there's no really one size fits all. Most organizations end up mixing and matching elements that actually work for them. So that said, there are a few common models out there, and by the end of the video, I will also share my favorites, so hang out until the end. The first option, and honestly the easiest one, is to not implement OKRs at all. What do I mean by that is instead of implementing OKRs, some organizations simply adjust their existing performance management system such as the balanced scorecard or whatever else they might have now, and implement some OKRs principles, but they do not call it OKRs. Now, things like shorter cadence, focus on innovation, greater transparency, focus on outcomes, or better alignment with strategy could be some of these OKRs principles that can be reflected within your performance management system. A great example of this approach is basically to not formally adopt OKRs, but to borrow what works for you from the OKRs and make it fit into your context. And this is actually a pretty common story. I've worked with clients before who, upon learning what OKRs are, they would say, wait, but we do this. We just call it balanced scorecard. And honestly, that's totally valid. You can absolutely keep balanced scorecard structure. You can keep balanced scorecard methodology, but implement it in a way that's less controlling and maybe less prescriptive as well. The objectives in the balanced scorecard can be set more collaboratively or can be cascaded. You can monitor progress more frequently or even base objectives on innovation and ambition rather than just business as usual. It all comes down to how you run the process. And the big benefit of that, you don't need to announce a big transformation or say, hey, we're shifting from balanced scorecard to OKRs. You can simply say, we are updating our performance management system approach, and here was changing. Now, this is way easier for people to digest, and you would probably see much less resistance. Yet another easy to implement hybrid documented by Chen and Neng in 2022, though honestly, hybrid might be a bit of a stretch here, is to fully adopt OKRs, but keep the perspectives from the balanced scorecard, namely financial, customer, internal processes, and people learning and growth. Now, personally, I think this is a very light integration. It doesn't really change the way OKRs work, or it doesn't even add a lot of complexity. So, calling it a full blown hybrid system might be giving it a bit more credit than it deserves. But if keeping those strategic perspectives really help you with alignment or structure within your organization, it can still be a useful tweak. Now, on to more complex hybrid systems. The first one is what I like to call using OKRs as a corrective tool for KPIs or objectives that fall short within the balanced scorecard. Uh, and here's how it works. When a KPI falls short of its target, then instead of just changing the metric or changing the target or our activities, or simply, and here's what most people do, just wait and hope that it's going to come back on track. We set an ambitious OKR specifically focused on closing this gap. In the setup, objectives and KPIs in the balanced scorecard remain stable, but OKRs act more like short term focused and action oriented initiatives. They help direct everyone's attention and energy towards correcting what's off track, and it's essentially like using OKRs as a course correction tool instead of a strategy execution tool, a targeted push to realign performance when things drift. But this approach actually raises a valid question. Why should I use OKRs instead of initiatives when I could simply use initiatives and get similar results or maybe even the same? For many organizations, it adds unnecessary complexity. You're suddenly asking people to work with two different tools in parallel, with OKRs and the traditional balanced scorecard. And that's not all. You also have to make sure there is a clear distinction between the two or risk total confusion. So while the idea of using OKRs as corrective action is interesting, it's not always practical, especially for organizations that value simplicity and clarity in their performance management systems. Now, the last hybrid system we're going to cover is by far the most popular, both in research and in practice. It involves using OKRs at operational level that support the achievement of corporate level and sometimes even middle management level balanced scorecard objectives. How does it work? Well, pretty straightforward. The balanced scorecard provides the stability an organization needs, while OKRs inject agility and adaptability. Together, they complement each other perfectly because the stability of balanced scorecard tones down the chaos that OKRs can bring sometimes, and the agility of OKRs energizing the more steady, more boring balanced scorecard framework, as wisely put it. The boring part was mine. On the plus side, even though the organization uses both frameworks overall, depending on your level, you'll primarily only work with one. Top management gets to keep control with clear, very straightforward objectives that measure success, while teams lower down enjoy more flexibility to adapt and pivot as needed. Basically, they're trusted as experts on the ground. They're empowered to figure out the best way to reach those high level objectives without top management always being micromanaging, butting in, or handing down rigid directives. Sure, there are probably countless other ways of mixing and matching these two frameworks in practice, but these are the most commonly seen and documented. Now, do I really need to tell you which one is my favorite approach? If you want to keep things simple and avoid swapping turns just to jump on the latest performance management trend, go with the first option. You take what you need from OKRs and blend it into how you already operate. You don't need to make much change, and it's going to be quite easy to implement overall. I'll see you next time with a less boring video. We'll be reacting to some real world examples of OKRs and debate whether you should even use OKRs you find online. In the meantime, like and comment on this video if performance still gives you some mild existential dread. You're not alone, and thank you so much for hanging out.